Hey guys, what's going on? Jeb here, and in today's video we're going to be discussing tension in the Bitcoin market because over the last couple of weeks we've seen Bitcoin not really have a ton of volatility, but in that time what we have seen is that Bitcoin has been building tension both on the shorter terms and on the longer terms. And in today's video I want to discuss that tension that Bitcoin has been building, because something you'll find in markets is that a lot of times when markets aren't doing a whole lot, they're secretly in the background building tension, be that bullish or bearish tension. They're building tension. They're coiling up the spring, getting ready for it to bounce. They're pulling and stretching the rubber band, getting ready for it to break or be launched out of your fingers like a missile. You're building tension with the anticipation of something happening in the market moving on into the future. And right now there's a lot of tension building in the market that I think is going to be resulting in an explosive breakout moving into the next couple of weeks here. We're going to be discussing all of that and more in today's video. So if you're interested in that idea of tension, I don't talk about it a whole lot on Bitcoin, but when I do, it typically does mean something important is coming. We're going to be discussing that in today's video. So if you do enjoy today's video, definitely consider dropping a like, hitting that subscribe button, and smashing that notification bell, guys. It does help out the channel when you do it. But without much further ado, let's go ahead and discuss how Bitcoin is currently trading around $4,000 and get right into it. Bitcoin is trading about $2.50, about $2 under $4,000 on Coinbase right now. Of course, it's trading a little bit higher than that on Bitfinex, but Bitfinex is the black sheep of the herd. Bitfinex is always off doing its own thing. That's partially because Bitfinex trades over Tether, and Tether is almost never actually one-to-one paired with US dollars because, to be fair, that is a very hard thing to accomplish. But anyway, over the last couple of days here, we've been doing technical analysis on this shorter-term consolidation pattern that Bitcoin finds itself in here. Of course, we saw that Bitcoin broke bullish out here from a downtrend that looked something like this a little while ago. Bitcoin broke out bullish, started moving to the upside, and has since entered this triangle pennant, this symmetrical triangle pattern, and is actually getting quite close to the end of it now. And as you guys know, the closer you get to the end of a triangle pattern, the more tension you build, and also the more likely it is that you're going to see a breakout. Every time you bounce around in here, and after you've established these trend lines, when you keep bouncing, you keep moving towards that end point, every time that you move another bar to the right on the hourly, the 4 hourly, whatever time frame, every time you move a little bit further to the right, you're getting more and more, you're increasing your probability that you're going to see some kind of breakout, whether it be a bullish breakout or a bearish breakout. Every time you come closer to this apex over here, you're increasing your likelihood that you're going to see a breakout. And that's really one of the first things I want to talk about with this concept of tension, because as you move forward in these consolidation patterns, as you continue moving, this market, it very well may be very volatile right now, but it's being constrained by this downtrend of resistance and this uptrend of support. So it varies. It's very possible sometimes, and this does happen a lot, where you have a ton of volatility moving into a very tight range here, a very tight consolidation pattern, and that volatility didn't just go away, it's just trapped. So when it actually gets released, then after you see that breakout, that's when you see how much volatility there is, and that's your moment of clairvoyance, where you actually become familiar with how strong the bulls or the bears are. After you see a breakout of one of these triangle patterns, oftentimes what you're going to find is that it's going to break out, and perhaps in this one, if we see a breakout here, Bitcoin, let's say for example Bitcoin breaks out and moves to the upside here, well, it'd be breaking at around $4,000. If it moves maybe $4,100, then we know that that's about how much volatility it had. But if it only moved $40, then maybe that's how we know that it only had a little bit of bullish momentum. Perhaps if it only moved like $20 to $40, then we'd be worried that it might fall back over. It's really a good thing to keep in mind that when you've entered these consolidation patterns like this, you have all that tension built up, and then just like an earthquake, when you break one of these levels of resistance, the fault slips, and you see that tension be released in bullish or bearish price action. And that's a good way of understanding, and that's a good way of determining the strength of the bulls and the bears. The strength of the bulls and the bears and the strength of support and resistance is something we talk about a lot in the Cryptocurrency Technical Analysis Academy, and it's for a good reason. It's because it's an undervalued but highly effective method of doing technical analysis. Understanding which side of the war that is constantly going on in markets is currently the one on top, be it the bulls or the bears. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about, is that concept of tension. I wanted to discuss that with you because it is going to be important for our technical analysis in today's video. Because of course, moving into this consolidation pattern here, Bitcoin is getting closer towards the end of it. And there's two ways that you can increase tension in a consolidation pattern. Move closer towards the apex of that consolidation pattern over here, or have a lot more volatility running into it. And Bitcoin didn't have a ton of volatility moving into this pattern. Now, Bitcoin did have a decent little move right here when it moved into the consolidation pattern, about a 4.5% move. But Bitcoin wasn't doing massive uptrends and downtrends and rallies when it entered this. If Bitcoin entered this pennant right over here, for example, then I would say there was a lot more tension and volatility built into that pennant. But right now, I wouldn't say there's as much. Now, that being said, Bitcoin did have a 4 or 5% move running into this, and this is a rather small pennant, so this would probably be something like a moderate tension consolidation pattern. Now, I know I'm speaking in terms that you guys are probably not familiar with because this isn't something that people talk about a lot. It's not something that I talk about a lot. But as far as how tense this consolidation pattern is, I would say it's not quite as tense as some of them, but it's definitely a lot more tense than many of them. I'd say it's like a moderate tension consolidation pattern. And a lot of that comes down to the ratio of the volatility moving into the pattern and the size of the pattern. This is important, so listen to this. If Bitcoin moves 40% to the upside and then enters a tiny little consolidation pattern, tiny little pennant like that, then you can reasonably expect that there's going to be a ton of tension in here because Bitcoin is being constrained in this tiny little area right here, and when it breaks out, it's going to break out and shoot straight to the moon. But if you see Bitcoin moves, let's say Bitcoin moves 3%. Instead of saying that this is a 40% move, let's say that this is a 3% move. This is a 3% move right here now. And then Bitcoin enters a triangle pattern that looks something like this, and this is only a 3% move, and Bitcoin moves in here, then there's not going to be a whole lot of tension built up simply because the ratio of the size of the pennant and the size of the movement going into it are not in favor of it being a very volatile movement. There's a lot of different ways that you can do technical analysis on pennants. I know I'm going in a lot more detail than I normally do, but like I said, I'm building into the concepts that we want to discuss continuing on in today's video. And one of them would be this continuation pattern right here. What is Bitcoin going to do with this pennant here, and what kind of price targets are we looking at? Well, one of the reasons that you draw price targets like this, where you draw the flagpole here and then you use it to extrapolate where you'll be going, is because it's actually a pretty decent measure of what I just said, because it incorporates the size of the movement that went into that flagpole, that went into this pennant, excuse me, and also incorporates the size of the pennant right there. So it's actually a pretty decent tool for extrapolating how far you think you'll break out. And a lot of times you will be breaking out of consolidation patterns after you've had 2 touches to define the level of resistance and 2 touches to define the level of support. Sometimes after 3 or 4, but normally after around halfway point, somewhere over here, but not necessarily over there, are you going to see the breakout. So that gives us a rough idea of where we can put this price target, somewhere right around here. So if we see Bitcoin break out bullish here, then we probably see Bitcoin run up to around $4,130 or so, and that would actually make a lot of sense, because if we look at the Bitcoin market, the Bitcoin chart on slightly longer term time frames here, or even just zooming out on the 1 hourly, we see that there's a downtrend that lines up almost perfectly there. And honestly, guys, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bitcoin broke out bullish here and moved all the way up to that level of resistance over the next couple of days and then rejected from it. I don't think Bitcoin's going to break it because I do see more bearishness in Bitcoin on the 4 hourly. On the hourly chart, however, we do see that Bitcoin is currently bullish. As you can see right here, Bitcoin over the last 4 hours or so has been bullish, and there is a decent chance that Bitcoin breaks out here bullish today. But it's really not even all that important which direction Bitcoin breaks bullish. Bitcoin breaks out of this pennant right here, because there's a much longer term, relatively speaking, much longer term chart pattern, and several patterns in fact, that we need to be looking at. One of them is the 4 hourly, and one of them is on the daily chart. And the one on the 4 hourly has to do with this ascending channel here, this ascending wedge here, whichever one you want to call it, this ascending wedge here. And the thing I want you guys to realize is that these are not bullish patterns. These are not bullish patterns at all. They're typically bearish patterns, and Bitcoin will typically fall bearish out of them. That coinciding with the fact that Bitcoin is bearish on the MACD right now, even though we may see a bullish cross in a little while, we are seeing bearishness. With all of that in mind, there is a pretty decent chance that Bitcoin breaks bearish out here. And considering what I've talked about previously with the strength of the bulls and the bears, and considering what I'm going to show you here in just a minute, it would be likely to me anyway that Bitcoin is going to break bearish out of this ascending wedge right here, that Bitcoin is going to fall over and start moving to the downside. And one of the reasons for that is partially due to the strength of the bulls and the bears, as I've discussed before. It's partially due to that tension concept that I've been discussing. But one of the reasons also has to do with the longer term downtrend that we haven't been talking about for quite some time, that is now making a re-entrance. It is entered stage right, and Bitcoin is now having to deal with this again. This downtrend of resistance right here that Bitcoin has been dealing with for a very long time, guys. I don't know how many dozens of videos have been dedicated to talking about this downtrend of resistance on this channel. Luckily, none of them have been in the last couple of months because Bitcoin has been below $6,000. But here we are again. We must once more discuss this downtrend of resistance, because if we look at it here, it is rather easy to define it like this. Now, we cut off a couple of the tops over here, but this is probably the best way to define this downtrend of resistance. And if we look at where Bitcoin is currently, I remember when Bitcoin broke below $6,000, I knew that this downtrend of resistance was going to become an issue again. It was just a matter of time. It always works like that. If we look at Bitcoin right now, this downtrend of resistance is now becoming an issue again. As you can see, I know I keep moving the chart around. This downtrend of resistance right here is very close to where Bitcoin currently is. And of course, this moving average, this downtrend of resistance can be manipulated a little bit. You could drag it up a little bit, drag it down a little bit. You could say that we're testing it right now. But the way I have it drawn currently, it looks like Bitcoin is coming in and going to be testing it in the next 24 hours or so. Now, of course, it's very possible that you draw that differently and that that downtrend comes through something like that, and then we test it in a couple days. It's one of those very long-term downtrends. I mean, this downtrend is over a year old. That's how old it is. It's a very long trend line. And looking at it on the 4-hourly means that there's a lot of room for play here because it's not going to be perfect. So we're kind of looking at a area of resistance on this downtrend rather than one specific line. Perhaps something like that to something like that. We're looking at levels of resistance right there. And that's not an insignificant downtrend of resistance, guys. That downtrend of resistance plagued Bitcoin for the entirety of 2018 and was a big part of the reason why Bitcoin fell below $6,000 in the first place. As you can see, Bitcoin was moving in here towards the end of this descending triangle pattern right over here, and it wasn't able to continue, and Bitcoin broke bearish after getting resistance and rejected from that downtrend of resistance. As I said in a video about 6 months ago, I haven't seen a rejection that bad since high school, guys. It was that bad. And it looks like that same thing may be happening again here in the next couple of days with Bitcoin coming up and testing this downtrend of resistance again. Now, there's two scenarios that can play out here. Either one, Bitcoin breaks bullish out of this downtrend of resistance and starts establishing bullish market structure moving on through the end of 2019, and we say hasta la vista, baby, to this downtrend of resistance, and we never have to worry about it again. That is a possibility, one that is not necessarily the most likely to happen, but one that is a definite maybe. And then there are other possibilities, of course, that Bitcoin comes up here, rejects off it, and moves to the downside, which I think is the more likely scenario. I think that Bitcoin's going to break bearish here, guys. Bitcoin is sitting under a lot of levels of resistance. Many of the oscillators are not looking bullish. We've talked about the weekly stochastic RSI, which is an incredibly powerful technical indicator, sitting in overbought territory right now and has just crossed. Next week, those two lines are going to be distant from each other. And that's not going to be a good thing for Bitcoin. It's not going to be a good sign. And one more thing to show you, by the way, is something I've talked about in previous videos, would be the 20 weekly simple moving average. This moving average right here, that purple one, purple, blue, whatever color that is, guys. I've told you before I'm colorblind, so that color right there, this moving average, if we move this downtrend of resistance, it just so happens to be lining up exactly with where we are right now as well. Now, that does mean that Bitcoin has kind of gotten through it, but of course, as we know, levels of support and resistance are sometimes also areas of support and resistance. They're not just necessarily going to be a perfect level of support and resistance. So it is very possible that we have gotten above the 20 weekly simple moving average, but it's also still likely that we are in that zone of resistance with it. And as you can see here, you can draw this downtrend of resistance a little bit differently. I'm moving it around here. Right around there is where I would like it based on the previous market. And if we zoom in around here, that's basically where it was before. It was somewhere around right there. And we zoom in back down here to the hourly chart, we do see that level of resistance, I did not mean to move that, we do see that level of resistance, this downtrend, is sitting right in front of us, somewhere right around here, depending on where exactly you draw it. Like I said, somewhere around here it's sitting in front of us. It's kind of nebulous because you can't know exactly when it's a longer term one like that, but we are sitting below this level of resistance. We're also sitting below this level of resistance, the longer term, the shorter term downtrend, but still a long term downtrend, this one right here, with resistance just above us. We have $4,000 to contend with, even though we're above $4,000 on many exchanges and the average price of Bitcoin is indeed above $4,000. We're still going to be contending with that level of resistance because we haven't gotten away from it. A lot of times, like I've talked about, they have levels of support and resistance kind of have a gravity to them. So if you're sitting up here around $4,100, sometimes you'll have a tendency to drop back below $4,000. And then, of course, we have the fact that Bitcoin is in this ascending wedge right here, which these do tend to break bearish. Couple that with the weekly stochastic RSI out here on this chart, and that does leave me rather bearish on Bitcoin. Now, with all that said, let's talk price targets, and then we'll wrap the video up, because I've been talking about bearishness for the last couple of weeks here, but for the last couple of days here, excuse me, but I haven't really been talking a ton about price targets. So let's go ahead and look at where Bitcoin might be headed after Bitcoin does break bearish here, because I think that's what's going to happen. Now, of course, that is what is likely, in my opinion, based on the technical analysis, but sometimes the technical analysis isn't going to predict exactly what happens. So, as you know, Bitcoin and trading in cryptocurrencies and in any market, in fact, is a game of statistics and probabilities, as is titled a video in CT2A, not a certainty, and is not crystal ball reading. Anyway, crystal ball reading doesn't actually work anyway, so maybe that's not a great analogy. Anyway, if we look here on the market, here on the chart here, I do want to show you guys some levels of support and resistance. One of the most obvious ones to me would be right down here where Bitcoin has had support before. We saw Bitcoin came down here, tested support right here. And then right here, we had a level of support when Bitcoin got a little bit of resistance, when Bitcoin was bouncing and rallying, moving to the upside. It got a little bit of support right there. We have resistance over there. These would be this level right here around $3,650, give or take some change, would be a level of support that I'm looking at. Of course, we have a lot of trading over here as well. Levels of resistance right there, levels of support right back over here. This is a very strong level of support that I think Bitcoin is going to definitely come down and test, and is probably going to, well, I'm not going to say whether or not I think Bitcoin is going to break this just yet, because we don't know exactly how intense a bearish breakout from this would be. But I do think Bitcoin's going to come down and test this anyway, and we'll see what happens from there. Another level of support that I would be looking out for would be the bottom of this move right here, where Bitcoin was sitting. Right over here, Bitcoin was sitting on a level of support at around $3,550. That's going to be a level of support also. We have a lot of trading around over here, right there, right there, right there. There's a lot of levels of support below us, but whether or not Bitcoin can hold them is the question. If Bitcoin starts moving to the downside here, then it is possible that Bitcoin bounces off of one of these and moves to the upside. I'm not talking about catastrophic bearishness, although there is that domino effect bearish scenario where Bitcoin comes down and breaks the 200 weekly moving average. That is a possibility, but at the moment I'm not talking about catastrophic bearishness. I'm talking about bearishness where Bitcoin falls 5, 10, 20% at most, maybe probably not even 20%. If we look at the move here, that'd be about a 10% move. I think if anything, Bitcoin will come down here, test these levels of support that I've shown you, and then it will perhaps come to this uptrend of support, and this uptrend of support right there didn't want to draw for me. I think we'll come up to that uptrend of support, and we'll see what happens from there. Whether or not Bitcoin's able to hold that is very important, but you guys already know that because we've discussed that at length. If Bitcoin can hold this and bounce, that'll be very good for Bitcoin, actually. It'll be a reset for the Bitcoin bears and the Bitcoin bulls. It'll exhaust the bears while giving the bulls momentum, and hopefully we can move up from there and break bullish out of this longer-term symmetrical triangle pattern that we discussed in yesterday's video. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. Tell me in the comment section down below what you thought of that analysis. Where do you think Bitcoin's headed over the next couple of weeks, guys? Because it is kind of hard to do TA in these markets when Bitcoin has this kind of low volatility. But overall, I do think that the technicals are pointing bearish for Bitcoin. Now, of course, there are bullish technicals. If we come out to the daily chart, I believe the daily MACD is still bullish, for example. Bitcoin's daily MACD is still bullish. We do see that the MACD on the weekly chart is very bullish, and this is a good longer-term indicator. But at the same time, we do see that weekly stochastic RSI and everything else I showed you in today's video. So like I said, let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the technical analysis in today's video, and where do you think Bitcoin is headed. I would be interested, as always, to hear your opinions in the comment section down below. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I do want to thank each and every single one of you for watching, as always, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.